That night, everything seemed to change in a single second. I had lived until then believing that I understood the meaning of love, loyalty and trust. But the words, those damn words I sent, changed everything. Simple, sharp and destined to cut deep, I know everything. Nothing more needed to be said. There was no more room for excuses, explanations or lies. I knew exactly where she was. More than that, I knew who she was with. The previous weeks had been a torture of silent observation, of details that didn't make sense and behaviors that betrayed something deeper. Her hesitation to look me in the eye, her lame excuses about late meetings, her cell phone always turned down. I realized before I even accepted what was real. When I sent the message, I imagined the impact. He was by her side, that much I knew for sure. The lover who had invaded my life, my home, my marriage. I could see, as if I were there, the moment they read it together. She would freeze, her eyes wide in shock, while he, more arrogant, would probably try to deflect, an excuse already formed on the tip of his tongue. But the words I sent were a sure blow, a clear warning that the game was over. My mind went back to the nights when I felt stupid for trying to rekindle something that, apparently, she had already put out. Her exchange of glances that once set me on fire was now full of secrets she never planned to share. How many times had I stood next to her, feeling that growing emptiness, while she made plans to see him? How many times did I look the other way, because admitting betrayal would be more painful than living in ignorance? As I typed that message, my hand was shaking. It was anger, yes, but there was also something else. It was a sense of justice, that she needed to feel at least a fragment of the devastation I felt. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about regaining control. About making it clear that she couldn't go on belittling me while living her lie. The seconds after sending the message were unbearable. The silence seemed to scream around me. The phone didn't ring, no message came back. I didn't expect an immediate reply, of course, but the silence was deafening. I began to wonder what was going on at that moment. Would they keep denying it until the last second? Or would she desperately try to save what was left of our life together? Betrayal isn't just about the physical act. It's about everything that's hidden behind it. The lies, the manipulations, the breach of trust. It's about all the times you made me feel that the problem was with me. It was me who worked too hard, who didn't show enough, who didn't see what was right in front of my eyes. She built up a narrative in which I was to blame for her dissatisfaction, while she went off on adventures with someone else. Now it was all coming out. She knew that I knew. And what about him? He was probably wondering what would happen next. What would my next move be? Because there was one certainty, I wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. They had to understand what it's like to be destroyed from the inside, what it's like to have the ground ripped out from under your feet. I stood up, unable to remain still. My emotions were running wild, a mixture of anger, pain and something I still couldn't identify. I walked around the room that now seemed foreign, every object a reminder of the life I thought we had. Her perfume still hung in the air, but now it was a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost. Meanwhile, I wondered what they would do. He might try to convince her that it was better to hide everything. She, on the other hand, would be torn between admitting the truth or continuing with the farce. But I had something else. A detail that would change everything, something they didn't know yet. And that gave me a sense of power that I hadn't felt for a long time. The minutes dragged by as I waited for some reaction, something to tell me that the message had reached its target. My mind was buzzing with possibilities, strategies and scenarios. Because one thing was certain, it wouldn't end here. It couldn't end here. Not after everything I'd discovered, everything that had been stolen from me. And now, with the truth out in the open, what came next was inevitable. Deep down, I knew that this message was only the beginning. That what was to come would be much more than they could have imagined. And that, in the end, they would feel the weight of every lie, every deception, every moment of betrayal. Because, unlike them, I was prepared to play to the end. And it was at that moment, amid the tension of the silence, that my phone vibrated. A single message appeared on the screen, and what was written there was not what I had expected. It was something that would completely change the course of things. Something that made me realize that this story had only just begun. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't support any kind of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry a clear message: betrayal destroys lives, trust, and relationships. Our aim is to show how wrong choices can have devastating consequences. Get ready now to dive into an intense story, full of emotions and twists and turns that will hold your attention from start to finish. Enjoy the story and hold on tight, because what's to come is absolutely shocking. James and Clara were, at first glance, the perfect example of a modern, balanced couple. They met at a casual event of mutual friends, an evening where the soft lights and ambient music created a relaxed atmosphere conducive to genuine connections. James was a practical, organized man with a natural talent for solving problems. He worked as a financial manager in an established company, and his dedication to his work was both an admired quality and a source of tension in their relationship. Clara, on the other hand, had an artistic spirit. She was a freelance photographer, always looking to capture the little moments in life that often went unnoticed. Her detailed eye and intuitive way of perceiving the world contrasted with James' methodical and analytical manner. It was this contrast that made them unique together. While he anchored long-term plans, Clara brought a freshness of spontaneity that made life lighter. They lived in a modest but cozy house in a quiet neighborhood. Every corner reflected their personalities. The living room was adorned with paintings and photographs taken by Clara, while James' office was a mixture of financial books and travel mementos that were part of their rare leisure time. Clara loved to remember how they chose every detail of the decor together, like that blue sofa she insisted on buying, even when James thought it was impractical. Their 8-year marriage seemed solid. There were no big fights or scandals, but small disagreements began to arise more frequently. James, methodical as he was, liked planning and routine, while Clara felt that spontaneity in romance had been left behind over the years. These frictions, although seemingly harmless, created invisible cracks in the foundation of their relationship. On Sunday mornings, James liked to drink coffee on the balcony while reading the financial papers, his way of preparing his mind for the week ahead. Clara, on the other hand, used the time to edit photos or explore creative ideas. Those routines that once brought them together now placed them in parallel worlds. He focused on stability, she dreamed of adventure. Their social circle also reflected this contrast. James' work colleagues saw him as reliable and discreet, someone who didn't let himself be carried away by impulses. Clara, on the other hand, was the center of attention at gatherings with artist friends, always animated, sharing stories and laughing out loud. It was common for her to return from these gatherings and feel her energy fade as soon as she crossed the threshold. James, still absorbed in his reports or planning, often didn't notice this gradual fading. Nevertheless, the good times were still there. Candlelit dinners, impromptu picnics and evenings when Clara would play an old vinyl while they danced around the living room still kept alive the connection that had brought them together in the beginning. It was in these moments that Clara believed there was still hope, that they could recover something that seemed to slip through the cracks of everyday life. The people around them had divided opinions about the couple. For the neighbors, James and Clara were the picture of a balanced union. James' family saw him as the responsible pillar, while Clara's friends thought she sacrificed too much of her creative essence to fit into his predictable life. These judgments, even if they weren't spoken out loud, permeated their relationship, creating a shadow that they both felt but rarely discussed. Recently, something seemed to have changed. Clara started spending more time away from home, claiming new photography projects and professional meetings. James, for his part, immersed himself even more in work, almost as a way of avoiding questions or confrontations. However, it wasn't disinterest, he still loved her deeply, but he didn't know how to verbalize his insecurities or how to address the growing distance between them. Last spring, James had planned a surprise trip to a chalet in the mountains, something Clara had always said she wanted. He spent weeks organizing everything, from booking to buying suitable hiking clothes. When he revealed the plan, Clara reacted with a smile that seemed more like polite thanks than genuine enthusiasm. The trip happened, but the emotional distance between them seemed greater than ever. She spent more time photographing the landscape than enjoying the moments with him. Clara, for her part, struggled with contradictory feelings. There was love for James, that was undeniable, but there was also a feeling of suffocation, of something lost that she could no longer identify. Perhaps it was the creative freedom, perhaps it was the idea that, with the passage of time, they had ceased to be partners and had only become cohabitants. This restlessness made her seek refuge in her photography sessions and casual encounters with friends who shared her passion for art. The setting of the house, which had once seemed like a home, now bore the weight of accumulated silence. Clara spent more time in the small studio they had set up in the garage, while James stayed in the office. In the evenings, they still had dinner together, but their conversations became shorter and shorter, restricted to trivial topics. It was as if they were both afraid to touch on deeper issues, to peel back the layers that could reveal unhealed wounds. Despite this, James didn't give up trying. He planned dinners, brought flowers unexpectedly and tried to find ways to rekindle the flame between them. Clara appreciated the effort, but something inside her seemed distant, a part that she herself couldn't access. She wondered if the problem was with James or with herself. There was one particular night that Clara would never forget. James was especially tired after a busy day at work, but he still prepared his favorite dish and lit candles on the kitchen table. They laughed together, reminisced about old times, and for a few hours everything seemed fine. But when Clara went into the bedroom and found James' cell phone open on a messaging app, something in her changed. There was nothing compromising on the screen, just a conversation with a work colleague about a meeting, but that moment made her feel watched, judged, even if by no one other than her own conscience. On the other side, James was also carrying his own weight. He didn't understand what had changed, but he felt the distance. His mind worked on practical solutions, more travel, fewer hours in the office, maybe even a dog, something to bring Clara back. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about external actions, it was something deeper, something that was out of his hands. In that house where so many memories had been created, there was now an atmosphere of uncertainty, like the moment before a storm. They both felt it, but no one spoke. And perhaps it was precisely this silence that carried the weight of something about to break. The air seemed heavier in recent days, as if something invisible had crept in between James and Clara. Small moments of silence that used to be comfortable now seemed to echo through the house like muffled screams. James began to notice patterns that he had previously ignored. The messages Clara received on her cell phone were accompanied by restrained smiles and quick glances at the screen. She started answering calls in another room, something she had never done before. He told himself it was just paranoia, but the restlessness wouldn't leave him alone. Clara, for her part, was immersed in a mixture of guilt and confusion. There was a chasm between the life she was leading and the life she seemed to want. She clung to the idea that none of it was premeditated, but rather the result of moments that just happened. That, of course, didn't diminish the weight she felt in her chest every time she looked at James. He was still the man who had supported her, who had stood by her in all her insecurities, who had turned her dreams into reality. But now, his every gesture felt like a cruel reminder of how far she was drifting away. The nights became longer for James. He would lie next to Clara, who always seemed to fall asleep before him, and stare at the ceiling, trying to understand where everything started to change. He thought about the last few months, the little clues that now seemed like clear evidence. The perfumed shirt she wore out and came back smelling different. The excuse of a last-minute meeting that somehow coincided with an evening when he saw her come back later, with her hair down and a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen for ages. One evening, while Clara was in the shower, James found himself staring at her cell phone on the kitchen counter. He knew that touching it would be a trespass, something he had always despised. But the impulse was stronger than reason. He unlocked the device, and what he saw there left him speechless. They weren't explicit messages, but the exchange of words was full of nuances, implications and intimacies that he hadn't shared with her for a long time. He felt a mixture of anger, sadness and a sense of betrayal so deep that he had to lean on the bench to keep from collapsing. Over the next few days, James tried to act normally. He needed time to understand what to do, to decide what his next step would be. Clara noticed the change in his behavior, but attributed it to the workload. What she didn't know was that James had begun to watch her every move with an attentiveness he had never had before. He noticed the way she spent more time getting ready, the smile that appeared when she thought no one was looking and, above all, the excuses that now sounded rehearsed. Clara, for her part, was increasingly disconnected from the reality they were living together. She clung to the idea that she wasn't a bad person, that it was just a passing moment. But somewhere deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. There was a force pulling her away from James, something that seemed irresistible, even if she wanted to fight it. It was on a rainy afternoon that James decided he couldn't wait any longer. He saw her hurry out of the house, with an excuse that barely made sense, and something inside him snapped. He grabbed his car keys and followed her. It wasn't something he would ever have imagined doing, but at that moment it seemed the only option. He kept enough distance so that she wouldn't notice him, but close enough that he wouldn't lose sight of her. Clara stopped at a small cafe in the center of town. James parked across the street, watching as she went in and chose a table in the corner. He waited, his heart racing, his chest tight. And then he saw him. A tall man with dark hair and a confident smile approached the table and sat down with Clara. They laughed, and the connection between them was evident. James felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He didn't go in. He couldn't. He stood there, watching the scene as if he were a spectator of his own life. The way Clara leaned close to the man, the way he casually touched her hand, it was all confirmation of what he feared. He got back into the car, unable to stand it any longer. His hands were shaking as he tried to process what he had just seen. It was no longer a suspicion, it was a reality that he could no longer ignore. Over the next few days, James lived in a state of torpor. He became more reserved, colder, but Clara didn't seem to notice. She continued with her routine, carrying with her the secret that James now knew. He thought about confronting her, putting it all out there, but something stopped him. It was as if there was still a part of him that was waiting for an explanation, something that could erase it all. The final straw came one evening when Clara went out again, saying she had a meeting with a friend about a project. James knew exactly where she was going, and this time he decided he wasn't just going to watch. He followed in her footsteps once again, this time to a discreet restaurant on the outskirts of town. There she was, with the same man, the two of them laughing and sharing something that seemed so intimate that it made James' blood boil. This time, he went inside. He walked over to the table where they were sitting, his eyes fixed on Clara. She went pale at the sight of him, and the man immediately backed away, as if he already knew what was coming. James looked at her, and then at him, before saying with a calm that didn't reflect the storm inside him, "I hope the food is good. That seems to be more important than respect." Clara tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The man started to say something, but James held up his hand, interrupting him. "I don't care what you have to say. This isn't about you." He turned to Clara again, his gaze full of hurt and restrained fury. "After everything, is this what you choose?" Without waiting for an answer, James left the restaurant. The walk back to the car seemed endless, and every step was charged with pain and anger. He knew that confrontation was inevitable, but what consumed him most was the need to understand why. Why, after years of dedication and love, Clara had chosen that. And, above all, what else was she hiding? The door to the house was open, swaying slightly in the wind. James, standing on the threshold, felt a wave of anger and determination wash over him. It was as if every doubt, every moment of hesitation, had been transformed into a controlled fury, ready to explode. He entered slowly, his breathing heavy. Clara was sitting in the living room, her hands restless, fiddling with a ring she always wore. When she saw him, she immediately stood up. "James, I was going to look for you. We need to talk," she said, her voice breaking. He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on hers. It's finally time to talk, Clara. What do you think I want to hear now? An excuse? Some crazy justification?" She hesitated, her eyes watering, but remained silent. James continued, his voice laden with pain and sarcasm. "Spare me. I saw you. I know everything. And what kills me isn't just the betrayal, Clara. It's how easy you made it look." She tried to move closer, but he stepped back, raising his hand. "No, stay where you are. You're going to talk, yes, but now you're going to start from the beginning. I want to hear it from you, Clara. Every detail. No half-truths." Clara took a deep breath, finding the courage to begin. "It wasn't planned, James. I was lost. I felt that we were drifting apart and I met someone who seemed to understand me." "Understood me," he repeated, laughing bitterly. "So that's it. It wasn't enough for me to be here, trying to save what we had. You needed someone to understand you. Clara, do you have any idea what this has done to me?" "I know I was wrong," she shouted, the tone of despair finally emerging. "But it wasn't like you think. I never wanted it to be like this." James stared at her, the silence cutting like a knife. "And what exactly did you want, Clara? Because it seems to me that you wanted everything but respect." She squeezed her eyes shut, the tears finally flowing. "It was a mistake. A horrible mistake. But it's not just that, James. It's not just about him. Oh, so there's more." He crossed his arms, his voice cold. "Go ahead. Surprise me." She hesitated, as if the words hurt her as much as the truth would hurt him. "It's about us. James, I feel like you've never really seen me. You've never seen who I am. I've always been the perfect wife, the woman who fit into your plans. But I'm not just that." James interrupted her, his anger finally boiling over. "Are you blaming me, Clara? Are you saying it was my fault? That you threw yourself into someone else's arms because I wasn't enough? Do you have any idea how hard I worked? The things I gave up for you?" She cringed, but continued. "I'm not trying to blame you. I'm just trying to explain. I lost myself, James. We lost each other. No, Clara. You lost me. And you know what's worse? It's not just the betrayal that destroys me. It's the fact that you've entangled our lives, our history, in a web of lies so big that I don't even know where it begins or ends. Who are you, Clara? Because, honestly, I don't recognize you anymore." She collapsed on the sofa, her hands covering her face. "I want to be honest now. I want to fix this." James laughed in disbelief. "Fix it? Fix what, Clara? There's no going back. Don't you understand that?" She looked at him, her face pale. "I need you to know something. Something I hid, out of fear." James narrowed his eyes, pain and exhaustion fighting to overpower his patience. "What? What else can you hide from me?" Clara took a deep breath, the words coming out like blades. "He's not just someone random, James. He's someone who's part of our lives in another way." He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" She closed her eyes, as if saying that would make her crumble. It's Liam, James. The father of our son's best friend. James stood still, as if time had stopped. The name echoed in his mind, and the anger he felt was so intense that he had to sit down. Are you telling me that you chose a man who lives with our family? Who is in our circle of friends? How? How could you do that? Clara shook her head, her eyes begging for forgiveness. I don't know. It was a mistake, it was all wrong. But it wasn't planned. It was a moment of weakness. James stood up, the pain visible in every movement. Weakness? No, Clara. Weakness is stealing a bullet as a child. Weakness is not destroying a marriage, a family. She watched him, helpless, tears falling freely. I'm sorry. He took a step back, his gaze empty. I'm sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara knew that, at that moment, any hope of redemption was disappearing. James, however, felt something else. A thread of determination was forming amidst the chaos. He knew that this story wasn't over yet, but above all, he knew that she wouldn't be the one to write the ending. James left the room without looking back, leaving Clara sitting on the sofa, consumed by her own guilt. He needed some air, some space to think. He walked out into the yard, where the night seemed darker than usual. The sound of leaves swaying in the wind was the only sound around him, but inside, a storm was roaring. He tried to organize his thoughts, but everything seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. After a few minutes, Clara appeared at the door. James, please, we need to finish this conversation. He turned slowly, his eyes fixed on her. End it? Clara, there's no end to this conversation. What you've done is a bottomless pit. Every word that comes out of your mouth pushes me deeper into it. She took a hesitant step towards him. I just want you to know that it wasn't because I didn't love you. I was confused, lost. James held up his hand, interrupting her. Loved? That word has lost all meaning, Clara. I don't want to hear any more excuses. I need to understand what you thought was going to happen. Did you think you could go through with this lie? She shook her head, the tears returning. I didn't think about the future. Every time it happened, I told myself it would be the last time. That I would stop. And it hasn't stopped, he replied, his voice filled with a calm that was even more frightening than his earlier anger. And you know what's worse? You brought this into our home. You did it to someone who knows our family. Someone who smiles at me as if nothing is happening. Clara had no answers. James continued, his voice now shaking. I trusted you with everything, Clara. With my life. And now I'm here, trying to understand how you turned it all to dust. She tried to move closer, but he pulled back again, his gaze hard. No. Don't touch me. I can't. I can't bear it now. Then what do you want me to do? She asked, her voice full of desperation. I want the truth. All of it. Don't spare me any longer. Because, Clara, honestly, I'm already destroyed. You can't hurt me any more than you already have. Clara took a deep breath, knowing there was nothing left to hide. It started last year, when Liam started showing up more at events. You were always so busy, and I was feeling invisible. He started talking to me, asking about my work, saying things that made me feel alive again. It was so easy, James finished for her. It was easy for him. He saw an opportunity and took it. And you let him. She nodded, the tears flowing uncontrollably. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm putting all the blame on him. It wasn't just him. I let it happen. I chose it. James laughed, a bitter laugh that seemed to have no joy in it. Of course you did. Because it was easier than facing up to what was wrong between us. It was easier than talking to me. Clara remained silent, his words echoing in her mind. James continued, now more to himself than to her. I spent months trying to find out what was wrong. Thinking that the problem was with me. That I wasn't being enough. Meanwhile, you were living another life. She watched him, her face full of pain. James, I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. I don't even know if I have the right to ask. He stared at her, his eyes fixed on hers. Forgiveness? Clara, you don't even understand what forgiveness means. Forgiveness isn't something you can just ask for. It's something you have to earn. And I don't know if you can deserve it. The silence that followed was deafening. James finally turned, looking up at the darkening sky. I don't know what to do now. I don't know how to go on. All I know is that this has shattered everything I believed to be real. Clara took a step forward, but hesitated. I want to fix this, James. I want to fix us. He shook his head, a mixture of sadness and disbelief in his expression. Us? There is no us anymore, Clara. You've destroyed it. And what kills me is that you did it so easily. She sat on the stairs, her hands on her knees, staring at the floor. James watched, trying to decide if he still felt anything other than anger and pain. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice low. I need time. I need space. And you need to think about what you really want, because this isn't about what I want anymore. It's about what's left of us. And, honestly, I don't know if there's anything left. Clara didn't answer, because she knew he was right. All that was left now was silence and the crushing weight of their choices. The silence between them became a constant, almost palpable presence. The house, which had once seemed like a refuge, was now a minefield of memories and tensions. James began to avoid the places where Clara was, moving around like a ghost, just fulfilling basic needs. He didn't know if it was emptiness or anger that consumed him more, but he knew he had to make a decision. Something had to change. Clara, on the other hand, was fighting the guilt that followed her like a shadow. Every gesture James made, every cold, distant glance, was like a blade cutting deeper. She desperately wanted to find a way to make amends, but she didn't know how to rebuild something that had been destroyed by her own choices. Everything seemed too fragile, about to break irreparably. One evening, while James was having dinner alone in the kitchen, Clara approached him hesitantly. Can we talk? Her voice was soft, almost pleading. He looked at her for a moment, knife still in hand, mechanically cutting the pieces of meat on his plate. Talk. What about, Clara? About how you've destroyed our lives? Or about how I should just forget everything and move on? She swallowed dryly, sitting down in the chair opposite. No. I don't want to justify what I did, because there is no justification. But I need you to know that I care. That I want to make it right. He dropped the knife on the plate with a clatter that echoed through the kitchen. Fix it. Clara, fix what? Do you understand what you've done? You brought someone else into our lives. Into our history. And now you want to fix it. She shuddered at his tone, but stood her ground. I know you're angry. And I understand. But I can't just give up on everything, James. I don't want to give up on you. Give up on me. He laughed, a bitter laugh that carried more pain than humor. Clara, you gave up on me the moment you decided that his attention was more important than respect for me. Than respect for us. She lowered her head, the tears threatening to fall again. I made a mistake. I know that. But I want to try, if you give me the chance. James stood up, pushing the chair away with a sudden movement. Chance. Clara, do you want me to pretend it never happened? Do you want me to pretend that every time I look at you, I don't see the image of the two of you together? Because, honestly, I don't know how to do that. She remained seated, her hands clasped in her lap. He walked away, picking up his coat and going out the front door. Clara heard the sound of his footsteps disappearing, leaving her alone with the pain she herself had caused. Outside, James walked aimlessly, trying to find clarity. He ended up in a park, the same one he and Clara used to go to in the early years of their marriage. He sat on one of the benches, watching the leaves slowly fall from the trees. Nostalgia hit hard, bringing back memories of simpler times, when love seemed immune to any adversity. He took his cell phone out of his pocket, staring at the screen. He thought about calling someone, anyone, but realized he didn't want to share it. Shame and pride stopped him. He wanted to solve it alone, but the loneliness was overwhelming. Meanwhile, Clara remained in the kitchen, the silence of the house enveloping her. She knew that James needed time, but time seemed like a cruel enemy. Every minute that passed felt like a reminder of what she had lost. She picked up the phone, scrolling through the contacts to her best friend's name. She had told her part of the story, but never the full details. She hesitated before pressing the call button. Clara, hi. Is everything all right? The cheerful voice on the other end was a contrast to the weight Clara was carrying. Not exactly, she replied, her voice breaking. I needed to talk. Of course, darling. I'm right here. What happened? Clara took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. I lost James. And I think it was my fault. On the other side, her friend was silent for a moment before answering. If you really want to fix this, Clara, you need to be honest. Not just with him, but with yourself. Because, from what you've told me, you're just as lost as he is. The words echoed in Clara's mind long after the call had ended. She knew her friend was right, but how could she be honest when the truth had already done so much damage? James returned late that night, entering the house in silence. Clara was on the sofa, waiting for him, but he didn't say anything. He just went upstairs and closed the bedroom door. She stayed where she was, feeling the weight of the growing distance between them. Over the next few days, their routine became even more unbearable. James left early and returned late, avoiding any prolonged interaction. Clara tried to find ways to make amends, but everything seemed insufficient. She cleaned the house, cooked his favorite foods, even left notes on the fridge door, but James ignored them. Finally, one Friday evening, he walked into the living room with an envelope in his hand. Clara watched him, her heart racing. He placed the envelope on the table in front of her without saying a word. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's a separation of assets," he said, his voice cold. "I haven't decided what to do yet, but I think we'd better prepare for the worst." She reached for the envelope, but couldn't open it. "James, please. It doesn't have to be like this." "It does, Clara. Because I can't go on living like this. I can't keep pretending it's going to get better, when all I see is the wreckage of what we used to have." She held the envelope tightly, the tears returning. "Don't you understand? I still love you, James. Even with everything that's happened, I still love you." He shook his head, his eyes full of tiredness. "What about me? How can I love someone who destroyed me? Who destroyed everything I believed in?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away again, climbing the stairs and closing the door behind him. Clara stood there, holding the envelope, feeling as if the weight of her choices was finally falling on her with full force. James didn't come home that night. He drove aimlessly, searching for answers that might never come. The silent streets seemed to reflect the emptiness he felt inside. At some point, he parked in front of a simple motel and decided to spend the night there. He needed space, a break from everything that was suffocating him. Meanwhile, Clara remained alone in the house, her eyes fixed on the door as if she expected him to return at any moment and everything to start all over again. But as the hours passed, the reality became clearer: perhaps he would never come back. The next morning, James finally picked up the phone and made the call he had been putting off. He called his lawyer, ready to get on with it. He needed a way out, something to help him end this cycle. His voice was firm, but inside, every word hurt like a wound that he himself was deepening. Clara, on the other hand, knew she had to act. She decided to look for James at work, something she had never done before. When she arrived at his office, she was greeted with curious looks. The receptionist hesitated before calling him, but James appeared, his face serious, his eyes exhausted. "Clara, what are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "We need to talk, James. I can't let things end like this." "Clara, we've already talked. I don't know what more you want from me. Honestly, I have nothing more to give you." She took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "I just want you to listen to me, at least once more. After that, if you want to move on, I won't stop you." He hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "There's a cafe nearby. Let's go." The two of them walked in silence to the place. They sat down at a secluded table, and Clara began to speak, the words coming out quickly, as if she feared missing her chance. "James, I know my apology means nothing to you now. But I need you to know that what happened wasn't about you. It was about me, my faults, my insecurities. I destroyed what we had, and I'll never forgive myself for that." He stared at her, his eyes cold, but there was a pain he couldn't hide. "Clara, I spent months blaming myself, thinking it was me who had failed. And now you're telling me it wasn't about me? That doesn't change anything. The pain is still here. I know, and I accept that. I know I hurt you in a way that may never heal. But, James, I love you. Even with everything, I still love you." He laughed, a bitter laugh. "Love? Clara, love doesn't do that. Love doesn't destroy. It doesn't lie. It doesn't betray." She lowered her eyes, unable to argue. "If you really can't forgive me, I'll accept it. But I can't give up trying until you tell me there's nothing left here." James took a deep breath, running his hands through his hair. "Clara, I don't know what's left. I don't know if I can forgive you. And even if I could, I don't know if I can trust you again." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Clara knew that this could be the end, but at least she had said what she needed to. James finally stood up. "I need more time. More than that, I need peace. If you really want to do something for me, give it to me." She nodded, the tears flowing silently. "I just hope you find what you're looking for." The next few days were like a fog for both of them. James threw himself into work, trying to fill the void, while Clara tried to rebuild her life somehow. She started going to therapy, trying to understand why she had destroyed something so precious. Slowly, she began to realize that her betrayal wasn't just a flaw in her marriage, but a flaw in herself. James, on the other hand, found unexpected support in a work colleague, Rachel. She was kind, understanding, and never pushed when she realized he needed space. The casual conversations that began at lunch turned into something deeper, and for the first time in months, James felt that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. When the day finally came to sign the divorce papers, Clara was calm. She knew that this was the consequence of her choices. James was also serene, although part of him still felt the weight of everything they had lost. Before they said goodbye, Clara looked at him, her eyes sad but resigned. "James, I hope you find someone who can give you everything I couldn't." He stared at her, the words on the tip of his tongue, but all he could say was, "I hope you find the same thing." When the door to the lawyer's office closed, they both knew that this was the end of a story, but also the beginning of something new. James moved on, stronger and wiser. His connection with Rachel slowly blossomed, and he discovered that there was still room for love in his life. Clara, for her part, continued her journey of self-discovery, determined never to repeat the mistakes that led her there. And so, what seemed like a tragic ending became an opportunity for rebirth for both of them. Because, in the end, the truth is that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself again. If you liked this story, leave your opinion in the comments and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. Remember, betrayal is never the answer, and here, we always try to show the real consequences that wrong choices can bring. Thanks for watching and see you next time.